Hello, my name is Tracy Sinclair and welcome to Coaching in Conversation, the Mastery Series. This series of conversations explores the concept of mastery in coaching. And I have the great pleasure of talking with several ICF Master Certified Coaches from around the world to understand what mastery really means to them, both as coaching practitioners and also as human beings. We explore many different perspectives and nuances of this topic, and I hope it is of use and interest to you as you continue to navigate your own pathway of development. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Coaching in Conversation with myself, Tracy Sinclair. And this time I am joined by a wonderful coach, human being and colleague, Jean-François Cousin, who is going to talk to us about mastery in coaching. And this episode is part of our Mastery series. What can I say about Jean-François? He is an amazing coach, quite a prolific coach. He has clocked well over 15,000 hours, I believe, in coaching, possibly more. Has coached people from all over the world, many teams, and has travelled all over the world as part of his work. He is also an author and a public speaker, and I had the wonderful pleasure of working alongside him on the ICF Global Board and he was the chair of the ICF Global Board in 2019. I really struggled to think about what to call this episode because there are so many things in this piece, I think, that are fascinating, are interesting, and deeply useful around our inquiry on mastery in coaching, and indeed probably mastery in any aspect of our lives. But having to land on one title, I have chosen this one, which is the tipping point of mastery in coaching is. I hope you enjoy. Well, JF, I am so happy that we have an opportunity to talk today. As we were just chatting before we started our recording, it's been far too long since we had a conversation, and I am really, really excited that you are joining me for an episode of Coaching in Conversation, the Mastery series.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Always a pleasure to chat with you, and I've been missing the opportunities we had when we were both on the International Coaching Federation Global Board, right? Working so hard, and it was much fun as well. I love that time. So thanks for having me today, Tracy.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And I know it's sunsetting for you where you are in Thailand, probably closer to the middle of the day for me. And I'm sure we're going to have a really nice conversation.
Sure.
So this thing called mastery, let's just open up the conversation very broadly to begin with. What does mastery in coaching mean for you?
Mastery to me is the embodiment of one's craft. And before coaching, perhaps I can talk about a painting. For example, I was watching recently videos of Pablo Picasso towards the end of his life, drawing superb birds or bouquets of flowers with just a few strokes. And what you saw was not a painter. What you saw was beauty in the making. He was embodying the creation of beautiful painting. And when it comes to coaching, I believe masterful coaches do embody coaching. And when a client sees a master coach coming in, they sense a loving presence. They sense a space where everything is possible, a space that's inspiring, that's safe, and that is going to kind of enable them to empower themselves to grow and shape their future in a way that's optimal for them and their people and their ecosystem. So, yeah, to me, mastery is the embodiment of our craft. Tracy, does this make sense?
I was just daydreaming there almost as you were describing that, JF, and it sounds absolutely wonderful. I mean, when you articulate it in that way, who would not want to be in that space, right? I mean, it sounded so compelling. And therefore, what is from your experience, and you've been working as a coach for many years, and what do you think enables us to create or co-create that space?
I'd say before a coach reaches mastery, right? There is quite a long process that cannot be bypassed or sidestepped, in fact. And you know, when you read the Robert Greene Mastery book, or you read Malcolm Gladwell's The Outliers book, there is this kind of rule of the 10,000 hours that enable ultimately someone to reach mastery in their field. I believe, yeah, there is a lot of truth in that. We've got to follow the steps to gain that kind of inner confidence, in a spaciousness, in a grace inside of us, right? That will allow us to be as we need to be to create that space. So that path is very classical, you know. When we start learning to become a coach, right? We are hopefully consciously incompetent, and then eventually we become consciously incompetent, right? And then we become consciously competent and eventually unconsciously competent, right? And that is a prerequisite, I believe, to be masterful, in fact, right? Because if that mastery, as I propose, is the embodiment of coaching, then of course the competencies have to be in the person, but forgotten about. So there is absolute presence to not only the person in front of us, our client, right, also, but to the possibilities that can emerge, in fact, right? And so my recommendation to those aspiring coaches, right, is don't ask how can I become an MCC, right? Take the journey, in fact, step by step, do all the mistakes, right? And those 10,000 hours I was talking about, right, also stand for 10,000 mistakes, right? And, yeah, and you know, Tracy, when we were on the global board of the ICF together, we saw the emergence of the new core competencies of the ICF, and we were both very delighted to see the coach embodies a coaching mindset become a core competency, as well as competency number 7, evoke awareness, right? And those two, why we were so delighted to see them happen, I guess, are it's because they are nourishing the coach's presence and the coach's being, right? Tracy, does this make sense?
I've got so many things swirling in my head here now that you're talking, JF, but maybe to pick out one or two things. I love the idea of we have to take the steps. You know, it's not just one leap. And I'm hearing in there something about, you know, this concept of 10,000 hours. We have to put the work in, and you know, 10,000 hours could be 10,000 mistakes that we're learning from those mistakes. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about what might be some of the other steps And now you might not be able to speak for other people's journeys, of course, necessarily, but I'm wondering about your journey. And the bit, I guess, that I'm really interested in is what is beyond the 10,000 hours? Because to play devil's advocate, bad practice is still bad practice, isn't it? So if I don't learn, then I could be making those mistakes 10,000 times and not actually progress. So there's something more, isn't there, than just the hours? What are your thoughts on that, around what helps us to move through that evolution of competence?
Yeah. One important thing to work on constantly, continuously, I believe, for the purpose of developing mastery, right, is self-actualization, in the sense that Darwin gave to self-actualization, right? And he went on to say that self-actualizing people experience more peak performance moments. Those moments, as positive psychology mentioned also, right, of extraordinary performance effortlessly, forgetting about the time that passes, right, doing some extraordinary things with ease, to the perhaps stupefaction of bystanders, right? So that self-actualization work for a coach, and for anyone for that matter, is of tremendous importance and value, I believe. And it starts with gaining self-awareness about who we are, who we've become, right? And then when we do that work consciously, right, and conscientiously, right, we see all those sides of us that we love, and also all those sides of us that we don't like, we may be ashamed of already. And then we have a choice. Who am I going to be out there in the world? Am I going to be the one who only exhibits the parts of him or her he's happy with, and hide the other ones? Or am I going to come out as fully authentic, right? And of course, the second choice is the right one. If you do choice number one, you're only fooling yourself. Others will take you for who you are, a fraud, right? And so you've got to make the choice of authenticity based on, with full acceptance of who you are, right? And that stage of self-acceptance, Tracy, is extremely important, because it triggers and nurtures mindful growth, right? You've got all those things about you that you don't like, and then you're going to pick a few that perhaps you're going to work on, right? So they become additional strengths, perhaps, right? And there are others that you say, oh, okay, nobody's perfect, right? I can't do everything. I'll do the best I can, right? And so that work enables the rise of healthy self-confidence, right? Because you're doing the best you can as an individual, right? Having accepted your whole self with all you like and all you don't, and working on the parts that you don't, some of them don't like, right? You're doing the most respectable work you can ever do. And then, okay, of course, you progress, and you get that healthier sense of self, self-worth, right? And that enables you to be more authentic in a healthy manner, and also humble and vulnerable. And those three attributes, right, are absolutely necessary in the coach facing her or his clients, because it's an invitation for the client to reciprocate and also be their authentic selves, display humility, display vulnerability. And then, of course, the conversation is going to be so much richer, because there'll be so much more said between two authentic, humble, and vulnerable individuals, in fact, right? And so that's very, very important work. And in a now very practical business-like sense, clients buy the coach primarily for the person. They buy the person, right? So they want to, they are savvy enough to know who's authentic and who's not. And you don't want to deceive them by attempting to fool them about who you are when you're not that person, and then they buy a product that is not upholding the promises they had forged up, right? So that constant self-actualization, right, is extremely important, in particular for because they generate that authenticity, humility, and vulnerability that are so important in the being of the coach, right? And how we do that, right? From reflecting about who we are, right? And there are tools that can help, but we really need to pause regularly and think about who are we becoming, right? And then who do we want to become? So that would be something more than just doing the hours and learning from practice, right? So learning about yourself and all that work of self-actualization also has the enormous benefit that we are more in tune with the effort that our own client in coaching sessions in particular are making to better understand themselves, right? And what they're going through, right? And that work demystifies those parts we don't like about ourselves or we're ashamed of, right? And so we drop judgment, right? And that also creates more safety in the space that we co-create with the client because they feel it, right? And then they will not be afraid to bring to the conversation those parts of themselves that they don't like or they are ashamed of. Tracy, yeah, that would be one other thing I'm thinking of that can help on the path to becoming masterful. Tracy?
Mm. I'm really struck by a couple of things there, JF. One is what you were describing about this constant exploration for self-awareness, both of us as the practitioner and our client, that this is a process around growth. I'm mindful of, the definition of coaching. And if we go back to competencies, to competency 8, where it talks about facilitating growth, that is ultimately the point of coaching, isn't it? The point of coaching is not simply to get an action plan at the end. It's an action plan that is born from, is informed by insight and growth to take us forwards, which I think sometimes is an important point that gets missed. That coaching is about forward movement in terms of growth and not just action steps, as it were, even though they're very important. So I love this idea of growth that you're bringing in, and also that you were describing there that a key part of this work is our own ongoing self-awareness, with the dark side as well as the light side. And I really, one of the things that is coming up for me is that, having worked and working continuously with many coaches, training them, mentoring, supervising in my capacity, in my work, many coaches are so focused on what do they need to learn to do with someone else, rather than the work that perhaps they could do with themselves. And I think this is perhaps one of the paradoxes. I don't know how this lands with you, that the paradox here is when we first start learning to coach, we are told just how client-centered it is, how it's all about the client, we have to be client-focused. And yet the paradox is, yes, and it's also about us, because we are part of that dynamic. And therefore the journey of mastery is one where we are working on ourselves as well as trying to be in service of other people. Is that's what I'm picking up, and I know I'm interpreting it in my words, but how is that landing for you?
Absolutely spot on. Thanks, Tracy. I think you were much more concise than I was. That's one of the things I've got to work on, but I'm keeping
Oh,
painting, right? The
I
concision, and
love the way
you know
you
that.
describe this. It's
Oh my,
wonderful.
tough one, tough one. And yeah, and there is also a tipping point, I believe, in our journey to mastery. And that tipping point is about uh, surrendering to coaching, which is a natural step if you are to become coaching, right? You surrender to coaching. It's one good day, you decide you truly trust coaching. You truly trust the process, right? It's gonna work, right? You don't have to work so much. You mostly have to be there, be inspiring in your love for the potential of the coachee and in your service to the emergence of that potential, right? Just you come out and you trust the process will work. It always does, right? Except, of course, if we would doubt that it's going to work, and then we would be in our head asking ourselves, what's the best next question to ask? And am I doing a good job here? Which is absolutely terrible, right? We're not the one who has to do a good job, right? The client has to do a fantastic job, right? They are the superhero, not us. We are in a very humble profession, Tracy. We are kind of backstage operators, right? Enablers of self-empowerment by the client, so they achieve great progress, right? And so that's surrendering, right? One day happens to us all, right? For some good reasons, and then we just let go. We are just present, and with some stillness inside that comes from that newly acquired belief that coaching works, right? So there is no need to be anxious. We are still inside. We are loving of the potential growth that will happen in the client. And we are also fearlessly challenging, right? To in service of accelerating that growth, right? Really, in essence, coaching is a growth accelerator process, right? Uh, yeah, so there is this surrendering, right? And it happened to me quite a long time ago because I'm a little bit old, right? When I was mentored for my MCC in the I don't know early 2010s, right? And my mentor really told me, I'm so in the doing of coaching. Why don't I just stop doing and be and then assess what unfolds, right? So I gambled. I just did that. I stopped doing, and it worked much better, right, Tracy? That's how the most celebrated orchestra conductors in the world are, in fact, right? They all start their career being kind of a micromanaging, trying to coerce the musicians to produce that music that they have in their mind, that is in their books, the best way to play the symphony, right? And those best ones in the profession, right? One day just surrender, right? Enable the musicians to take accountability for the co-creation of beauty, right? That's a story of Herbert von Karajan that I
Yeah.
tell quite often.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, let's surrender to the process. And then automatically the client takes accountability to lead, to take the lead and do the very best work they can on themselves and on their future. Does this make sense, Tracy?
Oh, absolutely. And we hear this term, don't we, so often, trust the process. And yet, the way you have described this, JF, I feel so much more brings that to life. And I'm really, thank you so much for sharing that piece, because I know that for many people, including myself, this concept of mastery can be somewhat intangible. It can be somewhat elusive, because we like to be in our heads, don't we? We like to think our way through things. We like to have clarity of answers to questions, and this is an elusive concept. I often think about this as a little bit like a feather, that if you try to grab the feather, it just drifts away. It's very hard to grab a feather out of the air, isn't it? Whereas if you trust the process, the feather might land. And then that's how I think of it. But you've just described that so well. And maybe just a little curiosity here that I'm interested in, if you could share, is you said, if we don't trust the process, what can happen is we are in our head, yeah, and we're thinking, oh, what question shall I ask next? So if we're going to embody coaching, embody mastery, if we're not in our head, where are we?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I love it. We have to function with. I like to say we've got to light up the whole Christmas tree from the top to the middle to the bottom, right? And we've got to light up or enable the time to light up their whole Christmas tree, the head, the heart, the guts, before we get into great coaching work, right? And which means we've got to expand our awareness to our whole body, right? Listen to our heart, our guts, right? And or allow them, at least if we don't listen to them, because we so listen to the client, to send us message that we will take in, right? And listen to the mind, to the heart and the guts of the clients, in fact, right? And the more I progress in my practice, right, Tracy, the more I see the listening to the energy of the client, right, and also being receptive to any message our own energy may send to our conscience as critically important. I was speaking at WX, that yearly free conference that's organized in June this year on the topic of work with energy. Energy never lies, right? That's a kind of a proverb, right? We can fake our emotions, of course. We can fake what we say, right? But we cannot fake our energy, right? So energy is one of the very best friends of coaches, right? If we are sensitive to the energy of the client, we connected to their true self, right? So I will tell you an anecdote that I found really amazing, Tracy. In that WX short talk in June, I had coached a Mexican lady speaking Spanish to me to demonstrate that even though I don't understand Spanish, by focusing on her emotions and body language and energy, most of all, I could ask questions in English that she understood. She was also an English speaker, right? But she was answering in Spanish, and the session went well. So then I was invited to a conference in Mexico, and they did a masterclass pre-conference. And then I invited someone in the audience to be coached by me, and we would play the game. I would coach in English, and they would answer to me in Spanish, so that the audience can see what happens, so what kind of transformation happens along the conversation in the coachee, right? When the coach is reduced to only working with non-verbal signals, right? And so there is this lady volunteering from Argentina. She sits in front of me. We do the session. I could sense that it was super transformative. And at the end of the session, Tracy, I invite her to stand up, right? To face the audience with me and go into debrief, right? And then I ask her, okay, could you please share about what happened? And then she looks at me with kind of blank eyes, right? Obviously not understanding my very simple question. So I was a bit destabilized. And then one of her friends in the first row raises her hand and tells me she doesn't understand English. So there we had this session where she did not understand a word of what I had said, Tracy, right? And I didn't know, right? Because she was responding so well, right? So she was responding to the intention that my body, my energy manifested to her, and that my words were kind of conveying, right? But not the words, since she did not understand, and she did fantastic work, right? So this, I think, is really an important endeavor for soul coaches, right? To develop our ability to sense the energy of the client, and we don't need to wait to prepare for the MCC credential. We can start that very soon in our development as coaches, right? And then that is also related to embodying coaching, right? In a way, right? Because yeah, that makes sense, Tracy. As always, I'm very long-winded, and I really need you to clarify and simplify what I'm trying to
Honestly,
express.
I don't want to interject. What a beautiful story, JF. That's so inspiring and, truly magical, really, and really does highlight a couple of things for me. One is at that level of mastery is to work, as you're describing, energetically with someone, and to trust the energy exchange and the intuition that we are noticing within ourselves based on what we're sensing, is a beautiful, that's what a beautiful story. And I'm so excited that you have shared that. And what it also highlights for me that I think is worth pointing out, that for those coaches who are at the earlier part of their learning journey, isn't this also another beautiful example of how we don't need to know all of the detail either? Because not only was your example there language free in a way, in terms of in understanding, it was also content free. Linguistically, verbally, it was content free, totally. And so I just wanted to highlight that point as well, of what an extreme example of content free, and yet so rich with content in terms of energy, intuition, non-verbal signals. So thank you. That was a lovely story to hear.
I will remember that forever. It was so much more than I expected, right? I expected just the audience to learn that, wow, indeed, yeah, wow, I've got to do more work on the energy with my clients, right? But no, it was like, oh my God, yeah, I got a bigger gift than the gift I was meant to offer, right? It's, oh, wow.
Yeah. And I guess what I want to maybe underscore there, JF, is something that you said earlier about us also being authentic and vulnerable, because you put yourself as the practitioner in a vulnerable position there, not knowing what she was saying, her then not knowing what you were saying, and yet you trusted, you surrendered. It's an ultimate example of everything that you're describing coming to bear, isn't it? And well, as always, I think we could talk for ages on this, but we're probably starting to come maybe to the end of our time for now. I'd love to invite you to maybe share one more thing. In what you've described so far, I feel as though you have shared with anyone listening, JF, many examples and gifts of how we can work on ourselves, on an ongoing basis, but also how we can and how we need to prepare ourselves to access that authentic place within ourselves and be vulnerable before we connect with our clients. What else, before we pause, would you like to share with our listeners? If we've got coaches out there listening that are thinking, wow, what can I do to get on this path or to keep going on this path for me, what would you offer them?
Yeah, well, then perhaps something really fundamental, and that ties with something you just said, right, Tracy, when you were referring to young coaches who are kind of destabilized because they do not understand the client's words, perhaps, right, or what the clients are saying with their language, right, I would say, hey, it's not part of the job description of coaching to understand the words of the client, and for that matter, actually to understand the client, right? The work is to enable client to, amongst other things, understand a bit more about themselves. So my message is, it's a delusional pursuit anyway to try and understand what clients say and what they mean, because even them cannot fully understand themselves. They come to just understand a little bit more of the client, right? Of themselves, right? Sorry. And so the advice is, just put aside that really inappropriate aspiration to understand the client. It's very detrimental, in fact, right? And consider that as a coach, fundamentally, your job description is to enable the client to empower themselves to grow, in fact, in the way that best serve an ideal future for themselves, in fact, right? And that ties with embodiment, right? Because when you embody coaching, in essence, you are a trigger that can enable that self-empowerment by the client, right? And whether or not you understand what the client says is so very secondary, in fact, right? Tune in to the energy, the emotions, and all of the communication and nonverbal, mostly, of the client, right? And make sure, yeah, you always enable that self-empowerment by the client to do their best work, right?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, as I'm reflecting on what we've discussed, JF, I'm really mindful of how much of what you have described is beyond the exchange of words. There seems to be quite a pattern here in our conversation today, that we've focused, or you have shared, so many elements of coaching that are non-lingual, you know, that are beyond the exchange of words, which for a profession that on the surface of it seems to be about the exchange of words, what an amazing doorway this opens up for us to work at so many different levels. Thank you so much for sharing. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm almost, you know, reluctant for us to pause this, because there would be so many other wonderful things to talk about, but maybe we can have a part 2 or something at some point. I'd love that if you're willing.
And thanks indeed, yeah, Tracy, and thanks for making this happen. Thanks also for your invaluable podcast, and I salute all the very hard work, all the discipline that you put in, you know, Tracy, when you could just go to the beautiful countryside around your beautiful place, right? And no, okay, you offer all those hours of your time to our profession, and you make such a difference. So thank you for your generosity, Tracy. Thanks also for the inspiration you offer day in, day out to us all, right? Thank you, Tracy.
Well, thank you, Jaya. It's lovely to speak to you, and we'll catch up again soon.
Absolutely, and likewise.
You have been listening to Coaching in Conversation, the Mastery Series, a podcast that takes a look at mastery in coaching, what it is, what that means, how do we nurture or cultivate it, and many other interesting questions. You can hear more about coaching education and development at tracysinclair.com and follow us on social media. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and a review, and also share it with your network to help us expand our reach. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.